Так, добрый день, уважаемые участники нашего вебинара. Меня зовут Сергей Парамонов. Хотел бы вас поприветствовать, всех тех, кто к нам присоединился. Я решил сделать небольшое вступление на русском языке для тех, кто присоединился к нам из русскоговорящих стран. Наш вебинар сегодня будет посвящен вопросам публикаций в международных академических журналах на примере издательства Wiley. И сегодня в качестве нашего приглашенного лектора я рад представить мою коллегу Грэйс Онг, которая занимается как раз изданием журналов и координацией этой деятельности на стороне издательства для многих наших наименований и журналов самих по себе. Наш семинар будет проходить на английском языке. Грэйс, соответственно, будет вести свою презентацию на английском языке. Тем не менее, вы можете задавать нам вопросы и на русском языке, и на английском. Для этого, пожалуйста, воспользуйтесь чатом, который у вас также на экране присутствует. Обратите внимание, что лучше направлять свои вопросы на английском языке, так будет проще. В случае, если вы хотите задать вопрос на русском, опять же таки, прошу вас написать это транслитерацией. Я затем в конце семинара обязательно помогу перевести их на английский язык, и мы эти вопросы зададим. Вот. Наш семинар продлится где-то около 40-50 минут, я думаю, вместе с презентацией, с вопросами. Пожалуйста, поэтому рассчитывайте свое время. В конце всем тем, кто зарегистрировался, мы обязательно пришлем ссылку на запись этого вебинара. Вы сможете ее просмотреть, вернуться к каким-то интересным моментам. Безусловно, будет доступна и слайды презентации. Ну и без дальнейшего вступления хочу передать слово тогда моей коллеге, и мы начинаем. Grace, I just made a small introduction to our audience. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Sergey. Welcome and good afternoon from Oxford in the UK. I'm Grace Ong, Senior Journals Publishing Manager, and thank you, Sergey, for the introduction. Thank you to you for joining me on this webinar. I'm excited to be spending the next hour or so giving you an overview of the publishing process and sharing helpful tips to help you get published in an academic journal, especially if English is not your primary language. So I'm just moving to the next slide. So in today's session, I'll be covering reasons to publish, how to prepare your paper, how to find a suitable journal, the submission and peer review process, how to get published when English is not your primary language, and finally, how to promote and maximize the impact of your research. The presentation will take about 40 minutes with time afterwards for questions. As I go through the presentation, please use the chat function to ask your questions, and I'll respond at the end. So in the next slide, we will cover how does publishing benefit you. Firstly, having a paper accepted for publication means your contribution towards your discipline is recognized by your peers and your community. Next, publishing is a tangible activity that could help with your career development. Have you heard of the phrase publish or perish? It means your career depends on your publishing activity. Having a paper published might lead to success in securing a promotion, help you make the shortlist in a grant application, and secure funding for your research. And finally, publishing can be considered an altruistic activity. Your institution or your funders have funded your research, and publishing the outcome of your research allows you to give back to your community and to society. The next question to consider is what to publish. Think carefully about this question because in case you're wondering, publishing anything and everything is not a good idea. We encourage you to publish original research, especially those that report on new methods or significant results, literature reviews which offer new insights on a topic. So in summary, if your research advances knowledge and understanding in your field because of new data, new methods, or new insights, please publish your work. On the other hand, we do not encourage submitting work which is out of date or duplicate or part duplicate previously published work. As you are doing your research, sorry, I moved the slide too quickly, my apologies. As you are doing your research, think carefully about whether your work adds value to the current literature. For example, is it useful to share preliminary results now or wait until there are more conclusive data? What is the significance of a replication study, but using a different system to get the results? The answers to these questions will guide your next steps. If you have decided that you want to go ahead and share your research, the next step is to write your paper. A standard research article follows a basic structure. Each section is a building block within this overall structure, and it is important to be aware of the purpose served by each section as your article builds to its conclusion. Following this structure will help you to begin the writing process and make your article easier to review. Here is a typical structure of a research article and the fundamental requirements for each section. Choose a title that best describes your work. It is concise and also free from jargon. Be mindful of search engine optimization by using the most relevant keywords. Remember that the title of your article should entice the reader to read your article. An abstract is a concise summary of the entire article. It is often the first and only part of an article that gets read, so it is important to get it right. In your introduction, explain why you did the research. Demonstrate your expert understanding of prior work in your field, typically via a literature review, to place the significance of your research among the existing literature. Think of the method or experimental section as a recipe. The aim here is to enable the reader to recreate your research with the same outcome. How you did it, what materials, tools, and techniques did you use? Report your results in the research and discussion. What does it mean? Why does it make a difference? Where does it lead? Does it open other avenues for inquiry? And finally, in the conclusion, what is the main take-home message that you want your readers to remember about your article? A research paper is not complete without a references section, and make sure that you list all the references that you cited in the list and include acknowledgements if it's relevant to your article. So I will now go through each section of a paper in more detail. So firstly, titles are very important. In the past, people found papers by going to a library, taking out print copies of the most important journals in the fields, and then looking up the papers in that particular copy. This just isn't true anymore, with articles being found via search engines or indices at the article rather than journal level. This means that your title is more important than ever. An explicit title can help you get citations because of the way in which other scientists look for relevant literature to cite. So a good title is short, typically 10 to 20 substantial words, includes the keywords up front so that it is optimized for search engines, clearly states a key finding or asks a question, uses current terminology in your field of study, so using the recent example, whether your field uses coronavirus, COVID-19, or the technical name of the virus, and it should entice the readers to want to actually read your article. When writing your article, be open to feedback from editors or peer reviewers who may have good suggestions on how to optimize your title and make it grab your readers' interest better. The next important part of a research paper is an abstract. It's commonly acknowledged that editors and referees often than not do not have the time to read your entire manuscript when making the first assessments. So if you can sell them the importance of your research in the abstract so that they are able to make a decision on whether your article is acceptable for the scope of the journal or it is worth reading, then you have done a good job. Secondly, due to abstracting and indexing agencies such as Web of Science or PubMed, more people are actually going to view your abstract than they are going to read your paper. If you can make it clear why your article is important, it is more likely to be found and then read. Now, this slide shows a simple illustration on how to optimize your abstract for search engines. It is important to place essential findings and keywords in the first two sentences. The reason for this is because search engine results normally display the first two sentences only. Repeat the keywords throughout the abstract to increase the chances of your article being picked up by search engines. And remember that the purpose of your abstract is to highlight the main points of your research clearly and concisely. In the main body of your paper, bear in mind that your reader is experiencing your thoughts for the first time. They cannot predict what they are going to read. In addition, research studies reveal that most academic articles are consumed online. So imagine your typical reader for one moment. He or she is in front of a laptop or computer. While reading your paper, he or she is likely to also be dealing with other distractions such as email alerts or incoming Twitter notifications. Therefore, to hold your reader's interest, give them an easy-to-understand roadmap by organizing your text into short sections by applying the principle of chunking. In the example on the left, the sentences run on, making the content hard to digest and also hard to remember. On the right, the subheadings make it easier to follow the narrative and help the reader to understand what you have written. Using the same principle, help your readers to understand your results by presenting the data in tables or information boxes and label them clearly. Now, references tend to contain more mistakes than in any other part of a manuscript. It is easy to understand why, because sometimes an error in one paper is replicated in subsequent papers because authors simply copy and paste the reference list into the next paper that they write. A good reference list includes all the papers that you have cited in your research and make sure that your citations are relevant. Citing a range of irrelevant papers is actually counterproductive and can be a hindrance to the editor and does not work to your advantage. If you have published lots of papers before, try to discern which of your previous publications is most relevant to avoid excessive self-citations. Most journals have an international readership, so try to avoid excessively citing publications from a single country or region only. Make sure that your reference list is a representation of all the international research that is available in that field. Your research paper may also contain images, so the points on artwork are self-explanatory, so I'll expand a bit more on the language. A common misconception with regards to writing an academic paper is that you need to use the passive voice in formal writing to make it sound more impressive. That used to be the writing convention, but times have changed and it is now fine, even actively encouraged, to use the first-person active voice. And if English is not your first language, you can ask a colleague for help or seek professional editing services. I'll come back to this point later on in the presentation. We emphasize search engine optimization a lot for this simple reason. How does your paper get read? Well, readers need to be able to find your paper first. So this chart demonstrates how crucial search engines are in driving traffic to your paper. More than half of the traffic to Wiley Online Library actually comes from search engines such as Google, Yahoo, and so on. So it is very important that you put your paper in the best position to be found by following search engine optimization techniques. Now that you have written your paper, the next step is to find the right journal for it. Before finding a journal to submit your paper, try to familiarize yourself with the breadth of journals in your discipline. At Wiley, our publications are hosted on the Wiley Online Library platform, which is home to over 1,600 journals, 250 reference works, and 22,000 online books. You can browse by title, by subject, and even by author. Look out for the open access or free access symbols, which indicate free content which can be accessed without a subscription. In addition, as a response to this pandemic, we've curated all the research on COVID-19, which is continually updated and the content is free to read. So the process of finding the right journal for your paper is not an exact science. Broadly speaking, think about your audience who would be most interested to read your research. Be self-critical. Ask yourself these questions. Is your research really groundbreaking in the field? Would it really be best served by submission to the top-rated, most popular journal? Or maybe it's better suited to a niche journal? What are your other options apart from the top journals in your field? Ask questions and to help you identify journals and possible target audiences by thinking about the following. Where do you read papers related to your research? Think about the most recent papers and where they have been published. Which journals have you cited in your paper? What do your peers and colleagues suggest you go for? And even if you're new to publishing, where does your boss or supervisor want you to publish? There are also other considerations. So think about once you have identified a handful of journals which may be appropriate for your research, the next step is to evaluate the target journals to form a submission plan. The additional considerations that would be helpful for you would be to look at the review and publication timescales. Does it take 3 months or even 6 months for your paper to be reviewed and then another 6 months to get published? So that timescale, the turnaround time, will be important to help you determine which journals to target. Now, this information may be available from the journal homepage or by contacting the editorial office. Look at the quality of the papers published in the journal. You can use the impact factor as a proxy for the quality of the journal, and then look at the likelihood of acceptance. Leading journals in a field tend to have a lower acceptance rate, meaning they tend to reject more papers. And are there any costs or fees to submit and to publish your article? Trusted journals have transparent guidelines about what they will charge and when the fee is due, and this information will be readily available in the journal's homepage. While it may be tempting to focus on the impact factor of a journal only, try to look beyond the impact factor. Read the aims and scope for each journal carefully, because the most important thing is your article must be appropriate for your target journal. All these steps are very important to help you find the right journal for your paper. Many publishers, including Wiley, also provide authors with additional guidance on how to find the right target journal. So we have developed a tool called Wiley Journal Finder, which is free of charge. And all you have to do is to provide the title and abstract of your article, submit it, and using the algorithm, it will come up with matching Wiley journals that will be relevant to your field of research. So the final tip is to always have a backup journal in case you are not successful with your first choice journal. And it might even be advisable to even have a backup for your backup journal as well. Once you have a list of journals in mind, the next step is to submit your article to your first choice journal. So how do you do this? Each journal has its own guidelines for authors. Some journals have got very simple guidelines with very few requirements. Others have more specific requirements. They tend to vary from journal to journal, so always read the guidelines before submitting, paying particular attention to formatting requirements, length of your article. Different article types will have different word count limitations, maximum number of figures, tables, and even references, whether you need a cover letter, and whether there are additional open research requirements. Most journals will operate an online submission system using a platform such as Scholar One Manuscripts. it's important to remember that individual journals will have their own submission site. And if you're like me and always forgetting your login and password to different sites, an easier and more convenient way to log in is to use your ORCID ID. You register for an ORCID ID once only, and your ID stays with you for life throughout your career changes. After you have submitted your paper, it goes through an initial screening. Most journals operate a double-blind peer review system, meaning your identity is hidden from the editor and reviewers and vice versa. Your paper will undergo a technical check to ensure that it doesn't contain any information that might accidentally reveal your identity, as well as make sure that all the components of your papers are present. All the tables that you've cited are present, all the figures are present, and that you have not omitted your reference list, for example. If some information is missing, the journal assistant will return the paper to you and ask you to fix the problems before resubmitting your paper. Your paper will then undergo an initial assessment by the editor. And what the editors do is they will examine and make an initial editorial decision largely based on the scope of your paper. Is it within the journal's aim and scope? What is the significance of the paper to the journal's readership, and what is the impact of the paper on the discipline? Most often, if a paper is rejected, initially what we call a desk rejection, it means that the paper will not be sent for peer review. And the number one reason a paper is desk rejected is because it doesn't fit the aims and scope of the journal. It doesn't mean that your paper is of low quality. It just means that your paper is not suitable for the journal, and it might be more suitable for another journal. If your paper passes the initial evaluation, it will be sent for peer review. Now, peer review is considered an important part of the research ecosystem. It is an evaluation of the scientific, academic, and professional work by others working in the same field as you, and some would argue that peer review underpins the integrity of research. So what do peer reviewers look for? They will be assessing your article for suitability for publication. Is it important, relevant? Is it well written? Is it novel? Is it clear of plagiarism? And also, they will help you to verify and improve your research by providing critical and constructive feedback, and they might even suggest new and additional ideas to incorporate into your research. The peer review process can be time-consuming and demoralizing. If your paper, this flowchart shows that the path from submission to publication is not straightforward at all. In most cases, the processes shown in blue and in orange will be repeated more than once before your paper is finally accepted for publication. And what I want to say earlier is that the peer review process can be time-consuming and demoralizing, and here are some tips to help you survive. Try to accept feedback as a learning experience and understand that the editors and reviewers are only trying to help you improve your paper. If necessary, please seek help with language or statistics if you need it. Be persistent because the process can be long. Try to remember that very few submissions are accepted in the first try and unconditionally. And then with every round of peer review, celebrate your accomplishment because you are one step closer to being published. However, sometimes, despite your best efforts, your paper does get rejected. If you ask 10 researchers how many have had their papers rejected, you will get 10 positive responses here. So even for experienced researchers, it is not uncommon to get rejection. Remember what I said earlier? Most of the time, a paper is rejected outright because it does not fit a journal's aims and scope. It's not because it is of a low quality. So if that happens, most publishers offer a manuscript transfer service to help you find a more suitable home for your paper without having to go through the entire process again. This flowchart shows you how papers get transferred from one journal to another journal either with or without reviews. So I've given a brief overview of the typical steps on how to write and submit your paper to a journal. If you're a non-native English speaker, however, there are additional steps you might want to consider to help you to get published. English, for better or worse, is considered the dominant language of research communications. Therefore, many researchers feel that in their career, they have to at least publish one paper in English, if not more. If you're not a native English speaker, where do you start? As you can see here, you are not alone. This table from Schimago shows the top research countries ranked by number of outputs. Out of the top 10 countries shown in the table, 6 countries, China, Germany, Japan, France, Italy, and India, are not English-speaking countries. And in case you're wondering, the Russian Federation is ranked 12th in this list, but I didn't have space to put all the top 20 or the top 15. It is very likely that a high proportion of the research outputs included in this table would have been published in English. So if English is not your first language, your native tongue, what can you do? Where do you start? The first tip is to immerse yourself in the language by reading as widely as possible. As I mentioned earlier, if you already have your target list of journals, look for the free content which is not behind a paywall. Pay attention to how papers, particularly in your own field of research, is written. Also pay attention to which terminology is used most frequently and which terminology is used in a preferred journal. You can also search repositories to find the right terminology to help you in your writing. Reading widely will help you to describe your ideas in English, and that will greatly help you to describe your own research. Besides reading, try to seek and participate in opportunities to listen to and speak in English. There's an English saying, practice makes perfect. So read, write, listen, speak, and repeat the process until you are familiar and confident in English. The more familiar you are with the English language, the easier it will be to write directly in English. However, that is not the only way. You may prefer to write in your native language first and then use a translation service to translate your paper into English. There are many types of translation services ranging from machine translation services such as Google Translate or Microsoft Translator. These are free, and there are also other platforms which are fee-based. Machine-based translations utilize artificial intelligence, so while the translations may not be perfect, the more they are used, the better they get. Besides machine translations, you can also tap into your personal network of colleagues and supervisors who may have more experience than you in writing and publishing in English. They can help you proofread your translated article and suggest edits to make your paper read better. And there are also professional translation and editing services. We at Wiley, we provide this as well, called the Wiley Editing services. What we do is we employ editors in various disciplines who are native English speakers and with postgraduate qualifications in the field, which will translate and edit your article. It is a paid-for service, but it comes with a guarantee that your article will not be rejected due to language problems. When writing papers in a foreign language, you might be tempted to reuse phrases that you come across in your reading. Beware of 2 pitfalls, however, which are plagiarism and self-plagiarism. Plagiarism is taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as your own. Most journals will use a plagiarism detector software, such as Authenticate, to screen new submissions against published papers. The tool picks up test matches. While it can be acceptable for the odd sentences or phrases to come up as a match, entire paragraphs or even entire sections are a cause for concern and could lead to an immediate rejection of your paper. The other pitfall is self-plagiarism or text recycling. This means reusing text from your own previously published papers, and while you are still the author of those words, using the same content over and over again in multiple papers is not an acceptable practice in research. If your paper has been accepted for publication, congratulations. Your paper, it will then be published, but there are some additional steps you can do to maximize its impact. And one of the things you can do to maximize the impact of your paper is to publish it as open access. Open access means your paper is immediately free to read, share, and download, and it is published under a Creative Commons license, which means it is disseminated as widely as possible upon publication. My apologies. Let me go back. Right. Currently, data shows that every 3 out of every 10 papers are published open access, and we have evidence that shows that open access papers are downloaded up to 97% more often than non-open access papers. I apologize, I keep jumping to the next slide. What I was saying was that currently 3 out of 10 papers are published open access, and there's evidence to indicate that open access papers are downloaded 97% more often than non-open access papers. And on average, open access papers receive 18% more citations than non-open access papers. This means that if you choose the open access option, your paper will be read and even cited more often than non-open access papers. I do want to make it clear, however, that for Wiley journals, unless it is a Go Open Access title, open access is an option. It is not mandatory. My apologies, my cursor keeps jumping. Okay, so now to the next slide. So, as the author of your paper, you are the best person to promote your paper. So make sure that once your paper is published, you share your paper, you talk about it to your new colleagues, old and new acquaintances, and even experiment with different mediums, such as video abstracts or infographics to promote your paper. My apologies, my cursor has gone a bit crazy. Okay, but thank goodness I have now come to the penultimate slide in my presentation, and this slide summarizes the 9 actions you can take to maximize the impact of your published research, ranging from seeking publicity for your article to networking, using multimedia and article sharing tools, and even using social media. We use social media a lot in our private personal lives and academics, and it is now acceptable to use social media in your professional lives as well. So for English-speaking researchers, Twitter is a very popular platform for them to share their research and also to participate in subsequent discussions about their research using the Twitter platform. I've come to the end of my presentation, so hopefully I hope that you've gained useful tips to help you get your next paper published in English. Thank you for listening. I apologize again for the movement of the slides. And now I think we can open the floor for questions if you have any questions to ask.
Thank you very much, Grace. Yes, we do have a couple of questions. So probably you can see it right in the question box, or if you need help, I can read it out.
Okay, I can see the questions. Let me.
Wonderful.
Okay, the first question is from Mikhail Bayakov. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Thank you for your question. It is about so some journals ask you to recommend multiple reviewers. Tell me how to find them, how to get the necessary information about them, position, email address, etc. And do you need to enter into a preliminary correspondence with them and ask for their consent? I'll answer your questions in reverse order. You do not need to contact them in advance and ask for their consent. How do you find reviewers? I think a good place to source for reviewers would be to look at the papers that you cited in your research. who are the authors of those papers, and they would be a good source for you to suggest as reviewers for your paper. So that will, from looking at your reference list, that will give you at least a handful of names. And when you're going through your submission process, some journals will actually even ask you to indicate whether these are your preferred reviewers or non-preferred reviewers. So you can actually make a selection there. It is important to be as neutral as possible. So if you are recommending your personal networks or your supervisor as your reviewers, again, that's not good practice. So try to balance that out by getting people who are experts in the field, but who you don't necessarily have a personal connection there. So as to how to get the necessary information, so when you look at the papers, the authors that you have cited in your research, every paper would have the correspondence details, the institution of the authors where they're affiliated, and then it's very simple. You can just Google them up, or you can follow the link in the paper, and that will at least let you know where they are based, and from there you can find their email address, for instance. So I hope I've responded to your question. I'm going now to the next one.
Grace, if you don't mind, let me do it, in a dialogue way. So I will just read it out to you as well and to the audience, and you will be our expert to answer this question. Is that all right with you?
Okay, no, I prefer that. Thank you. It's easier that way too.
Yeah. Wonderful. So the second question we have from another listener. What do you think about the titles with a question in heading? Is it correct or better to avoid this type of headings at all?
There's no hard and fast rule about it. I think it depends. Sometimes asking a question may be easier to invoke a response, because the natural response would be, if you see a question, you want to find out the answer. So you have to make sure that your article then answers the question that you ask. So there are no hard and fast rules about it. I think it's sometimes a question, asking in the form of question, will just make it more interesting, and because the natural reaction is that we want to find out the answer to a question. But regardless of whether you either phrase your title as a statement or as a question, the important thing is that you make sure that you include the keywords in your title so that it is search engine optimized as much as possible, and that when your article is published, it can be easily found, and by all the search engines, so people can find your paper. Thank you for that question.
Yeah. All right. I think we can move on to another one. So another question: can I use Wiley platform to collaborate with foreign authors? And I think the question is also about how to find financial support for the research. If we can help with that,
yeah, that's a very good question. So thank you, Dinara, for that. At the moment, the Wiley platform is useful for you to find potential collaborators who are also doing the same research as you, but the platform is not interactive in the sense that it will facilitate that conversation. So what it will do is it will display, it will show you where the other researchers are based, who's doing the same research as you, but then you would then need to, contact them proactively. So we haven't got to the point of making the platform interactive to enable that kind of collaboration. We are working on some tools which are kind of like offline, so not linked to the Wiley Online Library platform. So we have got some collaboration tools that can help you to look for co-authors, co-papers. So that is the published research. Another good source to look for potential collaborators would be in archives. So certain disciplines make very active use of archives to deposit working papers. And then that is also a good source for you to identify potential collaborators who are working in the same discipline as you. I hope I've answered that question well. So going on to the second part of your question, financial support for research. I think there are 2 points here. So one is probably, I'm guessing you're referring to how do you get a grant how do you write a proposal in order to get a grant to fund your research. If you go to the Wiley network, we can send you can we make sure that we send the URL to the webinar attendees later, so that we have useful resources to help you to show how do you write a proposal, how do you apply for a research grant. So there are resources that could help you in that process. The other financial support that you might be thinking of would be if you do want to publish your papers open access. If it's in what we call a hybrid journal, meaning it's a subscription journal, but it also offers open access. There is a fee to pay in order to make an article open access. So depending upon your institution, you might be eligible for funding from a centralized source. Or you can also, what is common now is to write for that funding for open access into your grant application, so that the fee for that is included in your overall grant support that you are seeking.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Grace. I think we will include into our follow-up email some useful links that you just mentioned. This should be, we can forward it afterwards anyway somehow. So yes, that will be easier. That will be possible for sure. So moving on to the next question from Tatiana. Does the journal decide on the length, number of pages for a paper to be submitted?
Okay, thank you for your question, Tatiana. Not so much the number of pages, but the number of words. So this is where it is very important to pay attention to the author guidelines. So because it will vary from journal to journal, and even then, some journals would accept different types of papers. So they could have a review paper, a research article, a short report, even letter to the editor. So different article types would have different author guidelines as well. So it's more about the number of words, not so much the number of pages. The other important thing to also pay attention, which sometimes is easy to overlook, is whether the number of words, the word restriction, applies to the text only, or does it apply to the references, tables, and figures as well. So either it is just for the main body or for the entire paper. So sometimes people overlook that. So it's important to pay particular attention to detail. So depending on the article types, there could also be restrictions on the number of tables, number of figures, and also number of references. Because some papers, some journals will restrict you to 30 or even 40 of the most relevant references in your list, and they don't want you to go over and beyond that. If you do find that your paper is too long, the advice will be to try to cut it down as much as possible and make sure that you fit this requirement. If you find that you have already shortened it to as much as you can, but you're still a little bit over, and you really want to submit your paper to your first choice journal, this is where I would advise you making use of the cover letter section to kind of like explain your rationale, to say that, I've managed to reduce it down to 8,200 words. I'm very much aware that your word limit is 8,000 words only, but, I find that, the additional 200 words is really important to relay the message of my article. So I think sometimes being on the offense is better than being on the defense, so if you make it clear up front, the editorial assistant is more likely to kind of like make a note of that, and hopefully they will make an exception for your paper.
Yes, thank you, Grace. Thank you for mentioning the cover letter. I think that is sometimes is one of the things that is overlooked on the author side, and sometimes people just, don't really pay much attention to the cover letter, which from what I heard from our fellow colleagues in the editorial team, it's still quite an important piece of submission to our journals anyway, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on, there is another question. So from Alexei asking, could you please recommend any proofreading services for technical papers? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, well, I'm not qualified to recommend them, but what I'll do is, again, as part of the links that we will share, after this presentation, we will share the link to Wiley Editing services. So it is our services, but then, you can use your own judgment on whether to use that or not. So I can't recommend any specific platforms or services, so I'm sorry, Alexei.
Right. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult from us, I guess, to do that anyway. Right. Okay, thank you very much. So moving on with we have just couple of questions just left. Is it better to submit articles to the high impact factor journals first, or start from the less prominent journals?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think most people will actually go from the highest to the lowest, and then, because if you get accepted, then all the better, then your article will be published in a journal for higher impact factor. But what I mean by that is not necessarily aiming for all the top 10 or even the Q1. So it may be that if you look at the impact factor, they are divided into different quadrants, Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. So it might be that for your particular research and for the journals that are relevant to your field, depending on what you've seen recently published, it might be better for you to aim for the top journal in Q2, for instance, because that's where the most relevant research is being published. But yeah, I would say aim for the top first and then make your way down the list. The only exceptions here would be niche journals. So sometimes the top impact factor journals, they tend to be generalist journals. So if you think of the Lancet, for instance, it publishes anything to do with science, as long as it's groundbreaking, it's novel, but so it's very broad, very general. So sometimes what you might see happen, again, when you go through your research, go through the steps carefully, you might find that your paper will be more suitable for a niche journal, so instead of a general journal, a journal that focuses specifically on your own field of research. So again, that is, you can get feedback from your peers, from your colleagues, from your supervisor, whether to go for a general or for a niche journal.
Right. Thank you. And I would just maybe add one more comment to that. I think it's also important to ensure that you're submitting your manuscript to one journal at a time. So you do not send it to all the potential journals at one time. So I think that's also important, especially when it comes to one. Especially if all these journals are coming from the same publisher, because obviously people do connect with each other, and it's using the same peer reviewers actually to review the manuscript, etc. Okay. All right. So moving on, so there is another question from Adina Hon. What if an article is not published almost a year after you send a manuscript, and what if the publisher is not responding to you? Whom to ask for help in this case?
I'm sorry you experienced this. As far as possible, we try to provide a positive experience to authors submitting to our journals. So yeah, this is an unfortunate experience. If you're not getting any responses, I think this is where try to think laterally. So look at who's the editor of the journal. Can you contact the editor directly? Who's listed on the editorial board? Is there an editorial office contact number? If it's not by email, by phone, so I think try to think beyond the publisher in this instance and see whether there are other people connected to the journal who can help you. If you're really coming up against a brick wall and not getting any responses. I think one thing, the last resort you can do is actually to withdraw your article from consideration in the journal, so that you are then free to submit it to another journal. In response to you said you pay for it, this is where if you've already paid the submission fee, look carefully at what is contained on the journal website. What are the reasonable grounds for a refund of the submission fee if it doesn't work out. Some journals make it very clear that refunds are not entertained under any circumstances, and in which case then you probably have to chalk it down to under experience. And I'm sorry that it's not a positive experience the first time around, but hopefully your next experience of submitting to a journal will be better.
And again, just a note from my end as well is that I think it's also important to always to check what is the mean of communication is offered by the journal. If you see they require a submission via email, this might be very exceptional case right now, because most of the big publishers like Wiley, for example, and Grace mentioned that, are using automated submission systems, so that you actually can track your submission along the way, and so you won't really have such a negative experience in communicating with the publisher. All right, a few questions, Grace. So from Hojakbar, what is your opinion on the limit of words for a successful paper? I think you managed to cover this in your previous response, so we can move on, correct? So another one from Yuri. So you talked about the so-called paywall. Is it possible to find any Q1 journals in the field of life sciences outside the Q1 field? In many cases, publication fees are astronomical.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Yuri. This is actually a two-part question, really. So what the paywall I was mentioning is the paywall to read the content. So content which are behind the paywall, you need a subscription to read it. There are some journals which are open access titles, and I'm sure in life sciences there are, high quality open access titles. I can think of maybe ecology and ecosystem, something like that, top journals which are also fully Go open access. So a fully Go open access journal means that the research articles are free to read, but then there is a fee to publish in the journal. So as I mentioned before, there are many ways to look at the funding. It's not necessarily that you, the author, who has to pay for it. In some cases, your funder, like I said, if you request for the funding in your grant application, so your funder will cover the fee. Sometimes your institution will cover it as well. So Wiley, we do have agreements with a number of institutions and a number of funders. So if you're based at those institutions or you're in receipt of research funding from those funders, you can be eligible to request for funding to cover the fees here. So again, Yuri, this is a good time for you to explore Wiley Online Library. So get onto Wiley Online Library, type in life sciences, or look through it using the subject finder, and then see what journals there are which have open access. And even if it's a subscription title, most of them would also have a selection of free content that you can read without a subscription to the journal.
Wonderful. So there's another question from the same participant, actually, if we can share a list of journals on linguistics. I mean, you also already covered this a little bit, so I just maybe repeat it from my end that, you can find, relevant journals on your field. Go into Wiley Online Library, which Grace shared during one of her slides previously. So it's very easy to find, a journal in a specific subject area, because we have we have a subject headings just on the home page, so you can actually go into this subject and check, the most relevant sources for yourself. So, but again, I think it will be included into our recording and also in our slides, so you will be able to find it easily. And there is one question regarding the requirements for pictures and tables from Elchin. Can you comment on that, Grace, please?
Yes. So first of all, I think that you need to, ask yourself the question: what do the pictures and tables add to my paper? Are they, is it to capture data in an easy to digest format? Does it add to the understanding of the paper? So kind of ask yourself, what's the value of having images and tables in the paper? And then think about it. The next thing is also then to look at the journal author guidelines and see whether there are any limitations on pictures and tables. If there are, then you need to be selective. You might have 10 pictures, for instance, but then if the author guidelines say you can only have a maximum of 6 images, then you have to select the 6 best ones that help to promote the understanding of your paper. The other thing to also, some of the other things to consider would be if the pictures or tables are not your own work, they have been published elsewhere, but you're reproducing them, make sure that you get permission beforehand before you include them in your paper. The other thing to remember also, especially for pictures, is that we are now screening screening papers for image manipulation. This is quite a concern in certain disciplines where they manipulate the images in order to demonstrate a result which is more significant than it actually is. So we now actually screen those images quite carefully. So if you're, so make sure that you are very clear on the journal's requirements regarding pictures and tables before you submit the paper.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Grace, for your answers. That was the last question I had on my list here, and we have from our participants. And we are very close to the end of our sessions anyway, so I think it's a very good, that was a very good session today. Thank you very much for your contribution, and I would like to thank also our participants and attendees who find, their time, to join. Any final words from your end, Grace?
Not from me, but I just want to say thank you for listening. I hope you find it useful, and good luck with your next paper, and I hope you get it published.
Thank you, Grace. Just final words in Russian. Уважаемые коллеги, спасибо большое вам за участие, спасибо большое за активность и за вопросы. Надеюсь, мы ответили на большинство вопросов, которые вас волновали. В случае, если что-то осталось неясным или какие-то вопросы у вас возникнут позже, пожалуйста, направьте их в ответном письме, которое вы получили от нас с этим приглашением или получите позже с материалами. Также всем участникам мы направим, кстати говоря, сертификаты участников, поэтому вы также их получите. Вот. На этом, я думаю, мы завершаем нашу сессию на сегодня. Еще раз спасибо вам большое и всего доброго. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time. Thank you very much, Grace, for your help. Thank
you, Sergey. Thank you, everyone. Bye.